Why, hello, my loves, and welcome back to Spook Manor. Are you here for a deep dive into the paranormal? Then join me as we follow an adventurous young family downriver. It is a warm summer's day in southern Idaho where our story begins. The Rupert family is on their long-awaited vacation to the historic Massacre Rocks State Park in Pocatello. As loving parents, Tom and Jill chose the park for both educational and recreational purposes. As part of the Oregon Trail, the park offers miles of hiking trails filled with history. The tall, cavernous mountains are a rock climber's dream, and the cliffs make for a beloved birdwatcher's paradise. Jill excitedly talked about her plans for a sunny picnic at Register Rock, where travelers of the Oregon Trail left their signatures for future generations like herself to remember them by. Jill couldn't wait to see Devil's Gate Pass, which is all that is left of the volcano which is now inactive. Ancient floods shaped the immaculate desert landscape, with the icing on the cake being at the base of the canyon, the winding serpentine waters of Snake River. As Jill harped on about the gorgeous surroundings, in the back of his mind, Tom silently stayed focused on the many activities the park has to offer. The disc golf, hiking, and mountain biking were all enticing, but nothing excited him more than taking his two boys, Aiden and Trevor, out on a boat for long days of fishing. There was much debate among the family before they left. The boys wanted to rough it with simple camping, and though RVing was an option, Jill knew she would be much happier in one of the park's many small cabins. She loved being out in nature and exploring history, but at the end of the day, she preferred to know there would be air conditioning. Their first night at the cabin was ideal. The air was warm and dry, though a subtle breeze would occasionally pass through. The evening had cooled the world around them, and they enjoyed the luxuries of a covered barbecue fire pit. The one-room cabin offered perfect accommodations for the family, and they went to sleep early that night with excited anticipation for the next day's adventures. Morning came early. Jill had a full day planned while Tom and the boys went fishing, and she was ready to see them off at dawn. As Tom and Aiden prepared the boat at the ramp, Trevor wandered off to explore the river. Aiden, 12, enjoyed taking the responsibility of helping his dad, while Trevor, 10, on the other hand, was far more adventurous. Trevor rounded a slight bend at a rocky area in the water's edge, and Tom called out to him to not go too far, as they would be leaving in just a few minutes. The sun was just now starting to rise, and the clear waters were steady and smooth. Trevor continued to wander forward as though he had not heard his father. He could hear something. A muffled crying, perhaps? A small child? He wasn't sure. He looked down into the water as it glistened with subtle movement. Yep, he thought to himself, there's definitely fish in there, each about 18 to 20 inches in length. He could see their scaly bodies, fins, and long tails as they moved gracefully beneath the surface. But something wasn't right. These weren't fish he was seeing. They appeared to have arms and legs. Maybe they were some kind of a strange water lizard? He didn't know. With the sun still barely peeking over the tips of the canyon, it was simply too dark for him to tell. He listened to the strange sound of crying, as though it was muffled under some kind of a blanket or maybe even under the water. When his father suddenly called out behind him, he nearly jumped to the sky in surprise. He replied to his father by hollering, "Come look at these weird fish!" But his father's voice must have scared them. The strange creatures had vanished from sight, as fish often do in response to loud noises. The rest of the day was filled with a bright and beating sun shining down on them, but they didn't seem to notice as they were catching a fair number of fish. It was a day filled with excitement and father-son bonding. It was a day the small family would never forget. They pulled onto the dock at dusk, knowing full well Mom would be furious that they were 2 hours late. Tom and Aiden quickly loaded up the boat and began tying down the straps when Trevor took off with his dad's rod and reel. He was determined to catch whatever he had seen that morning. He knew his mother was already going to be mad, so he felt like there was nothing to lose by taking an extra few minutes. Quietly he crept up to the spot where he had seen them and made a long cast into the glassy water. Nothing at first, so he cast again and then again, but to no avail. Staring into the waters, he waited with high hopes. He began to hear that strange crying again. This time, he was certain it was the sound of an infant wailing. Only this time, it was much closer. Staring into the water, he felt a hard tug on his reel and pulled back with all of his might. Yes, he caught something, and his adrenaline surged as he fought against the monstrous thing on his hook. He lost his grip, and his dad's favorite rod went flying into the water. Panicked, Trevor dove into the waters after it. He swam out as fast as he could, but whatever it was attached to was much faster than he was. Suddenly, something small grabbed him by the arm. It was that scaly creature he had seen earlier, but this time he could see it much clearer. It appeared to be an infant baby, about 15 inches in length, only it was pale, greenish, and scaly. It had fins and gills with big yellow eyes staring up at him. Its sharp, fish-like needle teeth bit down into his arm, and Trevor began to scream. He cried out and fought the freakish thing that clung to him. Suddenly, he felt something latch onto his leg. Then, another grabbed at his shirt. He was suddenly swarmed with these humanoid fish babies, and they were dragging him below the water. Trevor swallowed large quantities of water as he gasped for air. The water around him was splashing hard like a school of fish devouring a loaf of bread. Just when he feared he would lose consciousness, he felt a large hand grab him by the back of the shirt and pull him out of the water. It was his dad. He had pulled him from the clutches of those horrible things. The water was only waist deep for his father, who now was holding him close and carried him to shore. Upon sitting him down and looking him over, his father asked, "Why didn't you just stand up, son? What was all the fuss about?" Tom chuckled nervously as he searched his son's eyes for answers. Trevor was too scared to tell him what really happened, and they went back to camp relieved the situation hadn't been worse. Jill had made friends with Stephanie, who was one of the other cabin moms. Aiden and Stephanie's daughter had made a connection and were off taking a short walk through the campground while the moms chit-chatted around the fire after dinner. Trevor stayed silent the whole night. He was deeply unnerved by the events from earlier. Jill's motherly intuition took hold, and she began to push him for answers as to why he was being so quiet. It was then that Tom spoke up. "He slipped into the water when we were packing up. I think it scared him, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. Silly boy was flopping around like a fish out of water." Tom laughed, rubbing Trevor's head in an attempt to play down the situation and make him feel better. But of course, this only made him feel worse. "Are you sure it wasn't the water babies that got him?" Stephanie asked with a mysterious twinkle in her eye. When Trevor inquired for more information, Stephanie continued. "It is unknown if the legend is based on Native American lore or the tales of immigrant travelers, but what we do know is it dates back to the 1800s. The people were struggling with famine. They were starving and suffering greatly. Mothers didn't want their babies to suffer too, so they took them down to Snake River and drowned them. Some were said to have been drowned on the rocks at the very moment of birth. The myth goes that in order for the babies to survive, they grew gills and fins and transformed into these magical water creatures. They became vengeful for what had been done to them, and now try to lure living people into the waters so that they can drown them just as they were drowned. It is a commonly known legend around here. Some even say that's why they call it Massacre Rocks Park," she added as a final note to her story. And though Trevor never told anyone of his frightening encounter with the water babies of Idaho, there are many such stories of creatures being reported to this very date from around the country. But some places said to host these myths hold even more sinister tales. Be here next week for part 2. So tell me, my loves, have you been to Snake River in Idaho? Have you yourself hiked the trails of Massacre Rocks State Park? Please comment down below and like and subscribe for more fictional stories that are often of actual urban legends and sometimes have historical reference. See you next week and have a good night.